I was 31 when my father passed away. My name's Caleb, and by then, I was already used to being the outsider in my own family. Not the black sheep exactly, more like the invisible one. I'd moved out at 19, worked 2 jobs through college, built a life without relying on anyone. No handouts, no favors. That was the unspoken rule between me and my family. I don't ask, they don't offer. And it worked for a while. I got used to the distance, the quiet holidays, the forgotten birthdays. But when Dad died, something shifted. And that's when everything started unraveling. My dad was a quiet man. Private, composed, rarely emotional. He wasn't cold, just efficient. The kind of father who didn't say much, but remembered everything. When I was 13, he taught me how to balance a checkbook before he ever tossed me a football. He never raised his voice, never made grand gestures, but he always followed through on his word. I respected him for that. And I think, in his own reserved way, he respected me back. My older sister, Denise, was the complete opposite. For years older, loud, dramatic, always center stage. She had that magnetic kind of charm that sucked all the air out of a room. And growing up, I used to think she was incredible. The way she could get people to do what she wanted, it was like a superpower. Teachers adored her. Family friends bent over backwards for her. My parents, though they tried to hide it, definitely had a soft spot. She could crash a car and somehow come out of it with a new one. I scraped my knee and got handed a first aid kit. You get the idea. Denise married young, to a guy named Trent, who worked in finance. Or at least that's what he told everyone. I always got the sense he was one of those men who talked in buzzwords, but never actually did anything. His handshake was limp. His compliments, forced. He reminded me of a salesman who thought he was selling yachts when really, he was peddling used office chairs. But again, Denise had that pull. She could make anyone believe she was doing you a favor just by showing up. I wasn't close to either of them. They lived in the same town, just 15 minutes away from Dad's place, while I lived 3 states over, in a quiet little city where nobody knew my last name. But I always stayed in touch with Dad. Not in a flashy, constant updates kind of way. More like clockwork. A Sunday morning call every other week. A birthday card. A visit twice a year, always on his terms. We had an understanding. He knew I didn't care for small talk, and I knew he appreciated not being fussed over. It worked for us. So when I got the call from Denise, of all people, on a rainy Tuesday morning, I knew it wasn't good. I was halfway through a client meeting when my phone buzzed, her name lighting up the screen. I let it ring out the first time. Then again, the third time, I stepped out into the hall and picked up. Her voice was flat. Caleb, he's gone. Dad passed in his sleep last night. Just like that. No preamble. No warning. I leaned against the wall, the weight of it hitting slower than expected. I felt more cold than shocked. He'd had heart problems over the years, sure, but nothing urgent. Nothing that screamed this was coming. Are you serious? I remember asking, not because I doubted it, but because that was all my brain could process. He's gone, she repeated. I already made arrangements. The funeral's Friday. That was it. No asking if I was okay. No checking if I could make it. Just a statement of fact, followed by a controlled silence. I flew in the next day, landed just after dusk. Denise didn't pick me up. I didn't expect her to, but still, it stung a little. The funeral was sterile, efficient, just like Dad would have wanted, I guess. No long-winded speeches. No slideshow of memories. A plain wooden casket, a brief eulogy, and a reception in the community center with cheap coffee and finger sandwiches. Denise stood near the front, wearing a sleek black dress that looked more like gala attire than morning wear. Trent hovered beside her like an accessory she forgot to leave at home. I stayed near the back. A few people nodded at me, unsure who I was. One of Dad's old co-workers came over and patted my shoulder. He spoke highly of you, you know, he said. Said you were the only one who really listened. That hit me harder than the funeral itself. Because my dad, he didn't say things lightly. He never wasted words. If he said that, he meant it. Afterward, Denise didn't say much to me. Just a nod in my direction, like I was some distant cousin who'd barely earned a seat. We didn't talk until 2 days later, when I showed up at Dad's house to help clean up, sort some paperwork, just be useful. She was already there, sitting at the dining room table with Trent and some guy in a blazer who looked like he'd sell you life insurance and forget your name the next day. When I stepped in, she looked up. Cold. That's the only word I can use. Not angry. Not sad. Just ice. You didn't have to come, she said flatly. It's still Dad's house, I replied. Thought I could help. Trent chuckled under his breath. I ignored him. Denise glanced at the man next to her. This is Richard, our family's estate attorney. We were just going over some details. I raised an eyebrow. Our families? Since when? She didn't answer. Just gave me that look. The one she'd perfected over the years. Condescending. Slightly amused. Like I was a child who wandered into an adult conversation. I let it go. I wasn't there to argue. I figured maybe she was trying to stay in control because it made her feel secure. Dad had just died, after all. Emotions were strange things. Grief could twist even the sanest person into something unfamiliar. But the next few days proved it wasn't just grief. It was entitlement. Denise started taking over, declaring things, making choices without asking anyone, least of all me. She spoke with the confidence of someone who'd already decided the house was hers, that the car was hers, that the bank accounts, the furniture, even Dad's old coin collection, all of it was somehow destined to be part of her inheritance. I kept quiet for the most part, just observed, took notes. I stayed in Dad's guest room while she drove back to her house every night. One morning, I came downstairs and found her rummaging through his desk drawers. You looking for something? I asked. She didn't even glance at me. Important documents. Richard said we'll need the original deed for the house. I said slowly. She snapped the drawer shut and turned to face me. Don't make this difficult, Caleb. I've handled everything. The funeral, the expenses, the logistics. The least you can do is not get in the way. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. Like I was a burden, an afterthought. Like my presence was an inconvenience to her master plan. That was the first real flicker of anger I felt. But I didn't bite. Instead, I waited. I waited until the next day, when she came over again. This time with a manila folder tucked under her arm and a smug little smile on her lips. I was standing in the kitchen pouring coffee when she dropped it on the counter. I thought I'd be nice and tell you in person, she said. There's a will reading scheduled for Saturday. But you're not coming. I paused, mug halfway to my lips. Excuse me. She leaned in, her voice low. Cold. You're not coming to the will reading. It's better you stay out of this. I stared at her for a long second, the words slow to sink in. And who decided that? Me, she said simply. It's family only. People who actually mattered to Dad. You disappeared for years. You can't just show up now and expect. I didn't let her finish. I nodded once. Then, without a word, I pulled out my phone, walked to the front porch, and called my lawyer. Because here's the thing Denise didn't know. Dad had written a new will. And in it, I inherited everything. I didn't tell her that, of course. Not yet. But I would. Soon. And when they found out, the screaming didn't stop for hours. The funny thing about silence is how loud it gets when you're waiting for it to end. That entire week, after Denise told me to stay away from the will reading, I didn't say a word. Not to her. Not to Trent. Not to Richard, the supposed family attorney. I stayed quiet, calm, observant. I kept sipping my coffee in the mornings, kept helping myself to toast and eggs, kept walking through Dad's house like I belonged there, because I did. But deep inside, something had snapped. Not in a loud, fiery explosion. More like the final click of a lock turning. I realized, fully and completely, that Denise never saw me as part of this family. Not really. And she never had. I spent that week packing up Dad's books, his old hardcovers, most of them still with his notes scribbled in the margins. Philosophy, economics, classic fiction. Things we used to talk about during those rare moments when life slowed down. He was a minimalist in every other area of his life, but books were sacred. I handled each one carefully, dusted them off, and boxed them according to his old system. Denise never once offered to help. She only came by to dig through drawers, scan receipts, or sit on the couch with her laptop while making calls about liquidating assets. Do you need any of this old furniture? She asked one day, standing in the living room with her phone to her ear and a disinterested wave toward the coffee table. I'm thinking of just calling a junk service to clear it out. I glanced up from a stack of photo albums. That coffee table is solid cherry. Dad built it when he was 20. She blinked. Really? Huh. Well, it's not my style. That was the moment I realized she didn't know him at all. Not really. She knew of him. Knew his routines, his bank account balance, his Netflix password. But she didn't know how he thought. What he loved. The things he built with his hands. The small rituals he kept. The man who woke up every Sunday and made exactly 1 cup of tea, sat on the porch for 20 minutes, then read 2 chapters of whatever book was on his nightstand. That man was invisible to her. She saw only what she could cash out. I let it slide. Again, because I wasn't ready yet. Not until Saturday. Friday night rolled around, and I got an email from Richard. Short and polite, but dripping with passive aggression. Caleb, as per your sister's request, the reading of Mr. Hughes tomorrow will be a private event at their residence. We appreciate your understanding and discretion during this time. No address. No time. Nothing. I stared at the screen for a full minute. Then I forwarded it to my lawyer, Miles, with a simple note. Just as expected. Let's proceed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I laid in Dad's guest room, staring up at the ceiling fan as it spun slow circles, and thought about everything that had led up to this. Childhood birthdays where Denise got a new bike and I got socks. Christmas mornings where she opened 5 gifts while mine came from the dollar aisle. Report cards I brought home with straight A's and a quiet nod, while she got a B- in drama and the whole family went out for pizza. I told myself for years it didn't matter, that I didn't need validation, that being the underdog made me stronger. But the truth is, it wears you down. Little by little, it chips away at you. You start believing the story they've written for you. That you're less, that you don't matter as much, that you're only useful when they say so. And now, even in death, they were trying to write me out. Saturday morning, I dressed in a navy button-up and slacks, combed my hair, and stood in the mirror for a long while. It felt like gearing up for a job interview I already knew I'd won. Not because I deserved it more, but because I was finally ready to stop playing the background character in my own story. At exactly 10 a.m., while Denise was preparing cheese platters and wine glasses for what she probably assumed would be a quiet victory lap, my lawyer arrived at Dad's house. Miles is in his late 40s, sharp as a tack, and always dressed like a man who sleeps in his tailored suits. He carried a thin leather portfolio and a calm smile. "You sure you want to do it this way?" he asked as I handed him the spare key to the house. "She wanted to play games," I said. "So let's show her what happens when she loses." We drove over in silence. Denise lived in a gated neighborhood full of houses that looked designed by the same bored architect. Big windows, cold white stone, and overpriced landscaping. Her front door was already open when we arrived. Music playing low, the murmur of voices inside. I spotted Richard standing near the entrance, glancing at his watch like he had somewhere better to be. Denise saw me first. Her smile dropped instantly. "What are you doing here?" she snapped, marching toward the door in her heels. "I was invited," I said smoothly, stepping aside so Miles could enter behind me. Her eyes flicked to him, confused. "Who?" "Miles Carter," he said calmly, holding out a card. "Caleb's legal representative. I believe we have business to discuss." She didn't take the card. "This is private. Family only. You can't just crash." "That's where you're wrong," Miles said. "The most recent and legally binding version of your father's will names Caleb Hughes as the sole executor and primary beneficiary of the estate. As such, he reserves the right to be present for any reading or discussion regarding said estate." Her mouth opened, then shut, then opened again. Trent appeared behind her, looking vaguely alarmed. "Is this some kind of joke?" "No," I said, meeting his eyes. "But it's about to get real serious." We walked past them into the living room. The guests, mostly Denise's friends and a couple of distant cousins, fell silent as we entered. Richard looked confused but tried to maintain composure. "I wasn't aware there was another version of the will," he said. Miles opened his portfolio. "Filed and notarized 3 months ago. Dated, witnessed, and updated with full legal compliance. Would you like a copy?" Denise spun on me. "What is this? Some last-minute trick?" "He wouldn't do that without telling me." I looked at her, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the forgotten younger brother. I felt steady. "He did tell me," I said quietly. "He asked me to fly in, remember? 2 months ago. You said you were too busy to join." I could see her mind racing, replaying that moment. She'd brushed him off. I remembered Dad's words then, the last time I saw him. "You don't have to fight her, Caleb. Just stand still long enough, and she'll trip over her own ego." The will was read aloud, clause by clause, and with every word, Denise's face drained of color. Dad had left everything, his savings, the house, his assets, even the vintage watch he wore every day, to me. There was a separate note about her. A polite but unmistakably firm paragraph. To Denise, I leave the lessons she refused to learn. I trust she'll find them useful someday. She stood frozen as Richard finished. Nobody spoke. Even Trent looked like he'd just been slapped with a briefcase. Finally, Denise turned to me, her voice low and shaking. You manipulated him. You always knew how to twist things. That's why you disappeared for years. You were waiting to swoop in. I tilted my head. I didn't disappear. I just stopped coming around when I realized I was only invited when you needed something to brag about. Her voice rose. This was supposed to be my house. I was here every weekend. I took care of him. No, you dropped in to remind him you existed when you wanted something. There's a difference. She stepped forward. You don't deserve any of this. And that's when the moment came. The breaking point. The betrayal I never saw coming. She looked around the room, eyes wild now, and then, loud enough for everyone to hear, she hissed, he wasn't even Dad's real son. The room went dead silent. My stomach dropped. She kept going. He was adopted. You all knew that, right? No. Guess it didn't come up at brunch. Dad took him in when he was 5. You think he's some blood relative? He's not even a Hughes. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. That was the card she played. The one she saved for last. Miles, to his credit, didn't even flinch. But I just stood there, stunned. I hadn't known. Not officially. Not really. I'd always wondered, sure. There were whispers when I was a kid, and the lack of baby photos, and how our coloring never quite matched. But Dad never treated me like I was anything less than his son. Not once. And now Denise had weaponized it. She wasn't just trying to win anymore. She wanted to destroy. That's when the room erupted. I don't remember what happened in the moments immediately after she said it. The words didn't land like a punch. They landed like silence, deafening, thick, suffocating. Like the room had been drained of air, and suddenly everyone was staring at me as if I had transformed into something else. Not Caleb, not the son of the man we were all mourning, but an interloper. A stranger. A name on a will that didn't belong. I think I heard someone gasp. Maybe it was Trent. Or one of Denise's friends whispering something like, "Oh my God." Miles stepped forward, gently touched my elbow, but I was frozen. Not angry. Not embarrassed. Just hollow. She said it again, like she wanted it to echo. He's not even his real son. Dad adopted him when he was 5. Ask anyone. My mom didn't want him, but Dad insisted. It was charity. Nothing more. Charity. I don't even remember leaving. 1 second I was in that sterile, over-decorated living room full of wine glasses and mid-tier chandeliers, and the next I was outside, walking down the sidewalk like I had somewhere to be. I left my car behind. I just needed to move. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break, but something had cracked. Deep. I walked for over an hour. Past the rows of perfect houses. Past the coffee shops I used to visit when I came home. Past a small park I vaguely remembered playing in as a kid. I sat on a bench and stared at a patch of grass until the sun started dipping behind the trees. That's when the weight came down on me, full force. All those years. Every moment I spent thinking I was just less than because of favoritism. Every birthday I shrugged off. Every Christmas where I told myself I was fine getting a sweater while Denise got a vacation to Cabo. Every holiday I told myself it wasn't personal. That I wasn't being excluded, just overlooked. And now I had to question everything. Not just my sister's cruelty, but the roots beneath it. The truth of it. What if I was the outsider? What if Dad kept the truth from me to protect me, and Denise just threw it in my face because deep down, she believed it made her superior? Was that why he never talked about his first marriage? Why he never had photos from before I turned 5? Was I clinging to a version of him that was too idealized to be real? I texted Miles and told him I'd be unreachable for a while. Then I shut off my phone and checked into a cheap hotel on the edge of town. I needed space. From all of it. I stayed there for 4 days. No calls. No emails. Just silence. I ate vending machine snacks and watched reruns on cable. I didn't touch the folder Miles had given me with the full copy of the will. I couldn't even bring myself to open it. It sat on the bedside table like a reminder I didn't want. Every time I looked at it, I could hear Denise's voice in my head. He's not even his real son. I thought about leaving. Just packing up and flying back home, leaving the house to rot, handing the whole mess to lawyers. Let Denise think she'd won something. Let her choke on the hollow victory of driving me away. But something stopped me. I don't know if it was pride or spite. Or maybe that quiet little voice that had always whispered to me during the hardest moments. You don't quit. You rebuild. So I drove back. When I walked into Dad's house again, it felt like stepping onto sacred ground. The air was still. The scent of cedar from his old pipe collection still hung faintly in the living room. His jacket was still draped over the back of the armchair where he always read. The house didn't care about bloodlines. It remembered who lived there, who stayed, who showed up. I unpacked my bag in the guest room, and then, finally, I opened the folder Miles gave me. I read every word of that will like it was scripture. Not just the part where he left me everything, but the letter tucked in the back, handwritten on yellowing stationery. It was dated nearly 2 years ago. Caleb, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I won't pretend I was the most affectionate father or the easiest man to understand. But I need you to know something without question. You are my son. Not by accident. Not by obligation. By choice. I chose you the moment I met you. You were 5, terrified, clinging to a blanket with holes in it. Your mother didn't want to keep you, and neither did the system. But I saw you, and I knew, in that instant, I was supposed to be your father. I never told you because I didn't want it to feel like a caveat. You were never my adopted son. You were always just mine. I'm sorry if Denise made you feel less than. That was my failure, not yours. I tried to even the scales, but I know I fell short. This house, my savings, the things I've built, they're not payment. They're not compensation. They're just a thank you for being my greatest decision. Take care of yourself. Live a full life. And remember, blood never made a family. Love did. Dad. I cried for the first time in years. Not the silent kind. Not the dignified, one tear down the cheek type. I cried like a kid. Like a 5-year-old with holes in his blanket and no one left who wanted him. Until one man changed everything. That night, I knew I wasn't going to run. I was going to rebuild. The first thing I did was clean out the garage. I spent 2 days going through every dusty box, every tool, every paint-stained rag Dad left behind. I found his old project logs, meticulous, handwritten notes on every home repair he ever did. I scanned every page, saved it, preserved it. Then I tackled the basement. Denise had never even stepped foot down there unless she was looking for wine. I found old photo albums, tax returns dating back to 1996, even a few cassette tapes labeled with things like Caleb's first day of school and Lake Trip, 2001. I didn't even own a cassette player, but I ordered one online just so I could hear what was on them. It was slow, meditative work, healing in a way I didn't expect. Meanwhile, Denise sent emails. At first they were casual. Hey, just wanted to check in about the disbursement schedule. Then colder. FYI, the car in the garage technically belonged to Dad and me. I'll be by Friday to collect it. Then petty, you have no right to throw away my childhood things. I'm still grieving, you know. I didn't respond. She showed up once. I didn't let her in. I'll take you to court, she said through the security camera by the front door. I didn't answer. Just watched as she stood there in designer sunglasses, arms crossed, waiting for someone to cave. No one did. I met with Miles once a week, going over every account, every document, every obscure corner of Dad's estate. It was complicated. He had investments in places I'd never heard of, real estate trusts, even a stake in a small local bookstore that had his name listed as a silent partner. We combed through everything. I was methodical, careful. Dad would have liked that. At some point, I realized something strange was happening. I wasn't just maintaining his legacy. I was stepping into it. One day, I opened a dusty black binder and found all the original business plans for Dad's consulting firm. Notes in the margins, handwritten corrections, a list of client leads from the 90s. And at the very bottom, in all caps, underlined twice, stay small, stay honest. That stuck with me. Over the next few weeks, I started mapping out something new. A small consulting service. Remote, boutique style, offering practical business strategy for small and mid-sized companies that didn't want buzzwords. They wanted results. I used the seed money from one of Dad's old accounts and filed the LLC paperwork myself. Simple. Clean. Exactly the kind of thing he would have respected. I worked late into the nights, fueled by microwave dinners and the soft hum of the ceiling fan. I updated the house piece by piece. Nothing flashy, just bringing it back to life. I even found a few old Polaroids Dad had kept hidden behind his dresser mirror. Me at 6, covered in mud with a toy hammer in my hand, standing beside him as he fixed the fence. It wasn't a perfect photo, but it was proof. I wasn't an outsider. I was his son, and I had roots here, no matter what Denise wanted to believe. Then one morning, while I was cleaning out the attic, I found a box labeled Caleb, do not discard. Inside were dozens of letters. Letters Dad had written, but never sent. Some were to me. Some were about me. Some were just notes to himself, reflections, memories, guilt sometimes, pride always. He had tracked my college years, even the times I went silent. He'd kept printouts of the freelance articles I wrote. He mentioned the first time I visited and brought my own toolkit, how proud he was that I knew how to repair the garbage disposal without help. He wrote, "He's more like me than Denise ever was. But she'll never see it. She wants noise. Caleb builds quietly." That's when I realized I wasn't rebuilding his house. I was rebuilding ours. The house, the will, the letter, those were the gifts. But the real inheritance? It was identity. And Denise had no idea what I was becoming. Not yet. But she would soon. Because the quiet brother she dismissed? He was about to make more noise than she ever could. There's a moment in every revenge story, usually right before the storm hits, when the air goes still. Not because the chaos has ended, but because the pieces are finally falling into place. That's where I was. Not angry, not hurt, just clear. I had been back in the house for over a month. The dust had settled, at least on the surface. Denise hadn't shown up again in person, though her emails had taken on a new flavor. Desperation laced with faux civility. There was no apology for what she'd said at the will reading. No acknowledgement of the bomb she dropped. Just carefully worded attempts to regain access to what she thought she was owed. "Hi, Caleb. I understand you're still processing everything, but I'd really appreciate it if we could talk about Dad's car and the equity in the house. I think it's only fair I receive a portion of the inheritance." Fair. That word kept popping up. Another read. "I don't want this to get messy. It's bad for the family. Let's try to resolve this without lawyers." As if she hadn't already tried to weaponize the one thing she thought could erase me. I ignored her messages. Not because I was afraid of confrontation, but because I was working on something. Something big. See, Denise had spent her entire adult life skating on entitlement. She was used to getting what she wanted by making noise. Crying in the right boardroom. Throwing the right tantrum in front of the right uncle. But what she wasn't used to was someone playing a longer game. A quieter one. And that's exactly what I planned to do. The first thing I did was sit down with Miles and go over the fine print in the will, line by line. I needed to know every detail. Every clause. Every potential point of leverage. "I want to be prepared," I told him. "Not just to protect the estate, but in case she tries something." He nodded. Smart. She's not the type to give up quietly. He was right. 2 weeks later, a notice arrived from a firm representing Denise. A formal request to contest the will. They claimed undue influence, lack of mental capacity, and, you guessed it, fraud. "She's saying your father wasn't of sound mind when he changed the will," Miles said, tossing the document onto the table between us. I picked it up, scanned it, and exhaled slowly. "We expected this." "She has no real case," Miles added. The updated will was notarized and witnessed by 2 people with no familial connection. He passed 2 cognitive evaluations within the month it was signed. We have paper trails, medical records, and video footage. Still, it wasn't about winning in court. Denise wasn't playing for the win. She was playing for delay. For nuisance. For drama. She wanted to drag this out. Bleed the estate dry with legal fees. Force a settlement. Which meant I had to do more than defend myself. I had to take the board away from her entirely. That's when I remembered something. Something she probably assumed I'd forgotten. 3 years ago, when I came home for Christmas, I sat at the kitchen table while Dad made coffee. Denise was scrolling on her phone, barely acknowledging us. I remember she mentioned something about a side business she was starting with Trent, a consulting agency for influencers or small brands, or maybe it was something about digital PR. The whole thing was vague, like most of her projects. But Dad, ever the spreadsheet wizard, had leaned over and asked her, "Have you filed it properly yet?" She'd rolled her eyes. "It's fine, Dad. We used one of those online LLC sites. Took 5 minutes." That memory stuck with me like a splinter. So now, I went digging. Turns out, Denise and Trent had filed their business, Ridgeview Collective LLC, using a mail forwarding service and listed Dad's old P.O. box as the business address. The business had barely made any profit, but it was listed in Dad's financials. Why? Because he'd given them a loan. 50 grand. No repayment plan. No paperwork. I dug deeper. The business had been flagged for several violations by the local business bureau. Unpaid taxes, failure to report changes in structure, and one complaint from a former client who claimed Trent promised a $20,000 brand partnership that never materialized. Interesting. I compiled everything. Miles helped me contact a financial auditor who specialized in legacy asset protection. We traced every payment from Dad's accounts to Denise's business, including one $10,000 wire labeled as family emergency, made just 8 months before he died. It wasn't enough for legal action, but it was enough for leverage, especially when paired with what I found next. Dad had kept a separate, private journal in a locked cabinet in his study. I didn't know the cabinet even existed until I stumbled across the key, taped under the drawer of his desk like something out of a spy movie. Inside were notebooks, one for each year, with entries about finances, house repairs, medical updates, and yes, family matters. One entry from just 5 months before he died stood out. Denise asked for more money today, said it was for marketing materials, but I suspect otherwise. I told her no. She stormed out. I hate that this keeps happening. She doesn't understand boundaries. And another. Trent made another thinly veiled thread about being part of the will. I reminded him it's not his place. Caleb would never say something like that. He doesn't ask. He just shows up when it counts. I took photos, scanned everything. Miles looked through it all and said, "She's walking into a minefield." Exactly what I wanted. But it wasn't just about gathering dirt. I wanted to create something lasting. Not just revenge. Justice. And more importantly, legacy. So I made a call. To my friend Mark, a software developer and former classmate from college. I'd helped him with a business pitch a few years back when he was starting a small productivity app. In return, he owed me a favor. I asked him to help me build something. A website. Nothing fancy, just clean, simple, and true. It was called the Hughes Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to helping young adults who had aged out of foster care but didn't have a support system. Mentorships, grants, housing stipends. I started small, used part of the inheritance to fund the first phase. Mark helped me set up a donor page and back-end system. I wrote a mission statement based on Dad's journal entries and the letter he left me. "You were 5, terrified, clinging to a blanket with holes in it." That line sat on the homepage, right under a photo of Dad standing in front of our old house, arms crossed, a faint smile on his face. The caption read, "This house built more than walls. It built a second chance." I shared it with a few people in the community, teachers Dad had known, the local librarian who always talked to him about books. They loved it. One even offered to hold a fundraiser. Word spread. And then, something surprising happened. I got an email from Richard. Yes, that Richard. The estate attorney who had been Denise's mouthpiece at the will reading. He'd heard about the foundation, visited the website, and asked if we could meet. "I knew your father for over a decade," he said when we sat down for coffee. "I've seen a lot of beneficiaries squander their inheritances. But what you're doing, it's what he would have wanted." We talked for an hour. At the end, he said, "Off the record, Denise is panicking. She thought you'd cash out and vanish. She didn't expect this." I smiled. She never expects anything unless it benefits her. Then I asked him a question, one that had been sitting in the back of my mind for weeks. "Do you know if Denise ever tried to push Dad to change the will before he died?" He hesitated. Then he nodded. "She asked me to draft an early revision. Wanted to split everything 50-50. Your father declined. Politely but firmly. That was about 6 months before he passed. 6 months. Right before she came asking for that marketing loan. It was all fitting together now. And the final piece? That came when Miles forwarded me a video clip from Dad's home surveillance system. A backup drive I hadn't reviewed yet. The footage showed Denise and Trent in the kitchen 6 months before Dad passed, talking quietly while Dad was in the living room. "Trent, just bring up the will. You keep dancing around it. Denise, he's not ready. And if Caleb finds out, Trent, he's a ghost. He won't know anything until it's too late. Denise, we just need to make sure I'm in the paperwork. Then we're good." I saved the clip. Then I started planning the final act. I called Miles. "I want to bring her in," I said. "You sure you're ready?" I smiled. "Oh, I've never been more ready. The thing about revenge is that if you rush it, it feels hollow. Too fast, and it becomes petty. But if you take your time, if you build it piece by piece, brick by brick, it becomes something else entirely. Justice, maybe. Or closure. Or just the calm satisfaction of knowing you didn't have to scream to win. You just had to stand still while the other side collapsed under the weight of their own greed. I waited until everything was ready. Every document reviewed, every account closed, every legal string tied off with a bow. Denise's contest to the will had officially failed. The court dismissed it faster than I expected. Miles called it a laughable attempt, citing our overwhelming documentation, medical reports, notarized statements, and Dad's own detailed journals. Denise's lawyers tried to stall, filing motions and appeals, but all it did was rack up her legal fees. When the final judgment came through, I didn't say a word. Instead, I invited her to lunch. Neutral territory, an upscale cafe halfway between her side of town and mine. I called it a peace offering. She took the bait instantly, showed up in a new designer coat and oversized sunglasses, as if she were walking into a paparazzi shoot. "Nice of you to finally come to your senses," she said as she sat down. "I assume you've realized this isn't worth dragging out." I smiled. "Actually, I've realized it's worth finishing properly." I placed a folder on the table. Inside was a settlement agreement drafted by Miles. It wasn't for her benefit, it was a trap. I wanted her to see what she could have gotten. The language was generous. A courtesy disbursement of $150,000 to acknowledge the emotional labor provided by the deceased's daughter. No admission of wrongdoing. No formal inheritance. Just a token gesture. She flipped through the pages and smirked. "I knew you'd come around," she said. "Honestly, this is the least you could do." "You're right," I said. "It is the least I could do." She didn't catch the double meaning. I leaned forward. "But there's a catch." Her eyes narrowed. "You have to sign it now," I said. "No edits. No delays. You sign this, and you waive any further claim to the estate. Forever. Including Ridgeview Collective and the loans Dad made to you." She laughed. "Please. You think I care about that fake business?" I opened my bag and pulled out a second folder. This one was much thicker. "Funny you say that," I said, sliding it across the table. "Because your business just became very real to the IRS." She stopped smiling. Inside were copies of the business filings, the unpaid tax reports, the flag violations, and most damning of all, the financial trail showing Dad's loans being funneled into personal expenses, spa weekends, handbags, a failed NFT purchase, and a lease on a BMW registered under Trent's name. "I'm guessing you didn't report these as income," I said, "which makes them taxable and fraudulent. And, if I press the issue, criminal." "You wouldn't dare," she hissed, voice low now. "I wouldn't have to," I replied calmly. "I'd just hand the file to the auditor I hired. He's already flagged your business for irregularities. All it takes is one letter. One email." She sat back in her chair, mouth tightening. "You set me up." "No," I said. "You set yourself up. I just paid attention." She looked at the settlement offer again, then at me. "You want to destroy me over money?" I shook my head. "It's not about the money, Denise. You already lost that fight. This is about the lie you told, the one you used to try to erase me." Her expression flickered. Guilt? Doubt? Maybe. But it passed quickly, replaced by the same sneer she'd worn since we were kids. "He wasn't your real father," she said, like she needed to believe it. "He was the only real parent either of us had," I said. "And he chose me. You just took him for granted." The waitress arrived just then, oblivious to the emotional minefield she'd wandered into. I waved her off politely, and when she was gone, Denise stood up. "I'll think about it," she said. "No," I replied. "You won't." She froze. "Because this offer expires in 24 hours. After that, I'm done playing nice. And you can explain everything. To the IRS, to Trent, and to everyone who donated to your last branding seminar." I picked up the folder of evidence and tucked it away. "Your move." She left without another word. Later that night, I got an email from her personal account. No greeting. No sign-off. Just 2 words. I signed. And attached a PDF of the agreement. Initialed. Stamped. Final. I forwarded it to Miles, and then sat on the porch with a glass of wine. For the first time in what felt like years, I felt the tension in my chest unwind. Not because I'd won, but because I didn't let her rewrite the ending. But there was one last piece to place. 2 weeks later, I sent Denise a link to the Hughes Foundation's launch page. The first public fundraiser had gone live. We'd already raised nearly $50,000 in private donations. Our goal was to buy a property and convert it into transitional housing for foster kids aging out of the system. On the site, there was a section titled Our Story. It included a photo of me and Dad, one of the few we had together. I was maybe 6. He was crouched beside me, one hand on my shoulder, both of us squinting into the sun. The caption read, "He gave me a home, so I built one for others." Denise never responded to the email. I didn't expect her to. Trent, on the other hand, did. He sent me a DM on LinkedIn of all places. "Respect. Didn't think you had it in you." I didn't respond to that either, because I didn't need to. The revenge was never about theatrics. It was about clarity, power without shouting, proof without pleading. Dad used to say, "If you want people to hear you, speak less. Let your actions echo." And they did. The house stayed mine. The business grew. The foundation became something real, something good, not a monument to the pain, but a response to it. I didn't erase Denise. I didn't have to. She erased herself. And as for Dad, I kept his books in a glass case in the study. Every Sunday, I brewed a cup of tea, sat on the porch, and read a few chapters, just like he used to. I kept his rituals, his lessons, his love, and I made sure the world would remember him not as a man who left behind money, but as a man who left behind me. Because in the end, the real victory wasn't the inheritance or the revenge or the silence that followed. It was knowing I became exactly the kind of man he hoped I'd be. And that his last words to me, "You were my greatest decision," were finally something I could believe. Every single day. And that's how the story ends.